Finally, let's talk about becoming more competent in our intercultural communication. Intercultural communication competence is our ability to communicate effectively and appropriately in various cultural contexts. And in order to be able to increase our competence in intercultural communication, we need to have motivation, self-knowledge, other knowledge, mindfulness, and a tolerance for uncertainty. Let's talk first about motivation. If a person isn't motivated to communicate interculturally, then intercultural communication competence simply can't happen. Our motivation can come from one of two places. It can be intrinsic or extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation makes communication voluntary, rewarding, and a lifelong learning and curiosity process. So in other words, if we are intrinsically motivated to participate in intercultural communication, we are doing so because we want to and we find it rewarding and fun and we are a curious individual. If we are extrinsically motivated, on the other hand, this means that our desire for intercultural communication is driven by some outside reward like money, power, or recognition. So maybe we're being sent abroad for some endeavor for our job and we are going to get a promotion if it goes well. That is an example of an extrinsic motivation for intercultural communication. In some cases, members of non-dominant groups might be motivated toward intercultural communication by pure social survival. In addition to motivation, we also need self-knowledge. And in order to get to know ourselves, we often have to get out of our comfort zones and listen to people who are different from us so that we can develop our idea of who we are. We also do need to know the other. This is one of the most effective ways to develop our communication competence interculturally, and we can do this by having direct and thoughtful encounters with other cultures. Because even in racially diverse educational settings, for example, people tend to group off with their own race. So again, we have to be willing to go outside of our comfort zones and get to know the other. Mindfulness is another really important part of intercultural communication competence. Mindfulness is a state of self and other monitoring that informs our later communication interactions. So when we are being mindful, we are thinking to ourselves, how is this communication going? What are my reactions? What are their reactions? How is this process working right now? And doing that and being mindful makes sure that we are always checking in on how the communication is happening. And then finally, we have to have a certain level of tolerance for uncertainty. This refers to an individual's attitude about and level of comfort in certain uncertain situations. Whether we are communicating with someone of a different gender or a different race or nationality, we are often wondering what we should or shouldn't do or say. And this can often cause us to choose not to interact at all. But we have to be okay with the fact that we won't always know what to do or say if we ever want to become more competent in intercultural communication. We have to be okay with the fact that we're going to mess up and make mistakes and be willing to accept the fact that, people will be willing to forgive us for those mistakes as long as we are being earnest in our desire to communicate interculturally. So we have to be okay with the fact that we're going to face these uncertain situations and that we won't always know what we should do or say. Now, two of the main ways that we can build intercultural communication competence are through experiential learning and reflective practices. As we open ourselves up to new experiences, we are likely to have both negative and positive reactions. And it's useful for us to take note of the negative or defensive reactions that we might have, because those are often barriers that are getting in the way of us being able to communicate competently. And if we can identify where those barriers are, we can potentially become better at communicating with one another. It's also important, however, for us to note the positive experiences so that we can recreate them later. So reflecting on these experiences that we are having when we are communicating interculturally is one of the best ways for us to increase our intercultural communication competence.